The biggest saltwater fish of your life is swimming into your stomping grounds, and springtime is often the only time of year where you catch absolute massive trophy fish, whether that's trophy stripers, gator blues, or those prehistoric dinosaurs that grow to 80 and 100 pounds black drumfish, and they're all right at your feet, right on the beach, right off the jetties, and most fish lots out there are missing it. Well, I've spent 30 years mapping out these fish spring patterns. I even wrote the book on these core skills that are going to catch you fish anytime, anywhere. And in this video today, I'm going to share it all with you. This way you could go out there and you could catch yourself a massive trophy spring fish every time you hit the water. So let's get into it. Now, in order for us to consistently be on massive trophy spring fish, we have to understand what motivates these fish to move the way they do in the spring and to do the things that they do in the spring. And of course, I'm talking about spring indicators. Now, one of the primary indicators of fish movement and fish activity that you should be looking at is water temperatures. Water temperature is going to dictate everything these fishes do. And of course, what we're talking about is the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn. So your temperatures and the pre-spawn are going to be from 55 degrees to about 64 degrees. And the spawn is going to be anywhere from about 65 degrees to 68 degrees. And then of course, around that 68 degree mark where it starts inching closer up to the 70 degree mark and over, that is going to be your post-spawn. And of course, understanding where these fish are coming from, where they're going to go to spawn, and then we're going to go to the post-spawn is going to be ideal for you consistently being on these fish. And you're going to know all this by the end of this video. Now, as you go from pre-staging and the pre-spawn into the spawn, as those water temperatures are getting warmer, this is where your migratory routes really come into play. If you know where the spawning areas are, we have to understand another key detail of saltwater fishing, and that is tidal movements. Now remember, your water temperature is going to be your primary indicator here, but your tides are very much going to affect this water temperature, and this is how it works. So you have the spring sun, it's going to be beating down on those mud flats, in those sand areas, in those backwaters. That is going to warm up way quicker than the open ocean. Now, as you have that outgoing tide pushing out, all that warm water in the back is going to push out with that tide, and those fish are going to take advantage of all those newly active crustaceans and grass shrimp and mud minnows and whatever that's pushing out with the tide. Now, on an incoming tide, freezing cold water is pushing in, like 55 degree ocean water is pushing in, and that's going to push everything back up into those back bays and those shallow water areas. So as that sun is beating down and that cold water is coming in, those fish are going to want to stay on mud flats and shallow areas to still take advantage of that sun and the warmth, which those areas are going to stay warmer even though that cold ocean water is pushing in. So now that we got pre-staging areas down, right? Areas where these fish can warm up and feed heavily, you also want to keep in mind where the spawning areas are. So if you can find a map and you can say, okay, fish are going to pre-stage here, they're coming into the inlets, they're coming into the bays, and they're really going to look to end up over here where they could spawn. Now you can plan your route along your migratory fish highways of where those fish are going to travel to and from. These are very often sloughs, not the deepest sloughs, not like the deep channels running through bays and running through inlets and things like that, but like your offset sloughs, right? These fish highways, you know, areas where fish can get up shallow, and then if the weather turns, they could get back deep. So understanding that could really help you know how these fish are traveling and where you could set up shop in order to intercept them as they move up and down these systems into the bay and out of the bay. So let's talk about the spawn. So striper are actually pretty interesting. These are not freshwater fish. This is where some biology comes into play. What'll happen is you get a big female striper moving up into those estuary type of areas. And then you'll have the males like kind of ram her and push her around and get her into position to actually lay those eggs. Once she lays the eggs, the males will fertilize them, and those eggs will stay maybe 2 to 3 days until they actually hatch into little baby striper. And the eggs are just slightly denser than water, so they actually suspend in the water column. So you actually do need some water movement here in order to keep those eggs afloat. They need sunlight, they need that warmth that perfect water temperature like we're talking about, they'll hatch, and then they'll actually feed off their egg yolks for about another week or two, and then they themselves will swim into these estuary systems and live there for the next like 2 to 4 years of their life until they get big enough where they can join that breeding school out into the ocean. So now we know where the pre-staging areas are in the early spring. We know where the fish are going to look to travel to in order to spawn, right? And now once the fish breed and make little baby fish, now you enter the post-spawn. And one of the greatest post-spawn tips I can provide here is paying attention to horseshoe crabs. That's right. That is your spring indicator that the spawn is done. The fish have spawned out, the crabs have spawned out. Now, not all horseshoe crabs die, but it does take a lot out of them. So you will see a lot of dead horseshoe crabs right after they spawn, and that should indicate to you, hey, we're moving into the post-spawn. And what the post-spawn means here is that those fish, they're gonna transition into post-spawn areas, which are gonna be a little bit deeper water, so they can find a little bit cooler water, and now they're going to want to feed. They're looking to get away from those mud flats a little bit and looking to cool down a little bit. And that's where those incoming tides is really going to be to your advantage on where you're going to position yourself to take advantage of post-spawn feeding fish. Okay, so there's the drum. This is just a different view of it, but you see there's the drum close to the bottom there. There's a few up top. And these big jags up here, these are bunker. There's tons of bunker around, but these bigger fish down at the bottom, these are all drum fish. But now take a look at that right there. That is 70, almost 71 degree water temperature, which is not ideal. We are fishing the outgoing tide in the Delaware, and there's so many mud flats back here. It's been, 80 and 90 degree days for just 3 or 4 days, and it jacks up that water temperature that much because that mud absorbs all that heat. It gets really warm in the back, and ideal water temperatures for these fish is about 65 to 68 degrees. And so it's getting a little warm back here. So now, probably your best bet, and we're going to see, is on the incoming tide when that 55 degree water temperature out in the ocean starts pushing into the bay. It's going to drop this water temperature down, and it'll probably get it in that ideal range between 65 and 68 degrees. So that's what you want right there. All right, now locating your spots. Okay, so we talked about the pre-staging areas, your spawning areas, and your post-spawn areas. But one of the greatest skills that you can develop as a fish-a-lot is just using your eyes and locating different areas that the current is moving water in things like eddies or underwater points, things that most people aren't going to pick up on. This is a skill that I've showed you numerous times in my videos. A matter of fact, when I take the kids fishing, I actually teach them how to do it. And my nieces and my 2-year-old daughter and my son, my 7-year-old son, can pick up on these. Kids are quick to learn, and they can catch just a ton of fish. So if kids could do it, a lot of you fish-a-lots out there can do it. So look for these structures, like I just mentioned, like shoals next to deeper water. You can see how the water is moving, and you can position yourself just right. We also talked about pinch points or choke points. If you look at a chart and you notice the funneling of water, you can also see that with your own eyes. That is a great place to look for these striped bass, black drum, and monster bluefish that are coming in to take advantage of these fish in the back bays right before they head back out into the open ocean. So a lot of the things that we talked about in the pre-staging area, the pre-spawn, the spawn, and the post-spawn, now you can combine all your knowledge here and really hone in on your fish throughout the entire spring fishery. All right, now take a look. Moved even closer to the ocean, the mouth of the bay. Now we hit 66 degree water. So yeah, we're in the zone right there. Let's see what we can find. All right, let me horse him in so we get the fish off here. Put a little muscle behind us. Look at that fish. Oh yeah, beautiful, beautiful drumfish. Gonna get its head towards you. Nice. All right. Oh, look at that! What a bigger fish than my father's fish. I don't think so. Wow, it's just so much bigger. Yeah. So double-headed drumfish right there, fish-a-lots. There you go. Love it. And all right, so I just wanted to show you a quick tutorial here on a chart of how you can narrow down where you're fishing, whether you're fishing early spring, during the spawn, or post-spawn later in the spring. And what we're looking at here is Cape May in New Jersey, and the other side is obviously Delaware and the Delaware Bay. This is a huge body of water, but you can see that we could really narrow down areas where we're going to fish quite easily and just cut out a bunch of dead zones. So let's first start with pre-staging and the early spring when fish are moving in and looking to get warm, and take a look. So this is where fish are going to come in, obviously, in the ocean, and these secondary sloughs right here. That's exactly what I'm talking about with these migratory fish highways. These are deeper water, okay, leading into these shallow water. And take a look at this. This is mud, sand and mud, combination of structure right here. That's good. Okay, this is all super shallow water that's going to warm up really, really fast in the spring. Now take a look at this. As you move further back into the bay, mud. This is one giant mud flat back here, and it's going to warm up really, really quick. And that is really where these early fish-a-lots fishing are going to start catching some of these big black drum right off the beach, as well as other species like striped bass. And take a look even further back in the bay. You see all these secondary creeks and channels and rivers, and that's really going to be advantageous to these fish. So a bunch of shrimp and crustaceans and crabs and mud minnows are going to be flushing out of all this warm water area, and your bigger fish are going to be able to lay here in these mud flats. Now, as you look further out into the bay, you see mud and shells. This is ideal. So they're in shallow water. They're getting warm, and they have shell beds right here. Clams, razor clams is a big one in the Delaware Bay, and those fish are really going to be laying in these muddy waters, or these mud flats, I should say, and this is really going to be ideal in the early spring and pre-spawn. Now, as it gets warmer and those fish move into spawning, okay, they're going to find a little bit of this deeper water. This is where these migratory fish highways are going to come into play, and they're going to look to find that comfort zone, a little bit deeper water, lay their eggs, spawn out, and then they're going to move right into the post-spawn. Now, as post-spawn gets started, okay, this is where these back areas are going to be really warm at this point, okay? They're going to be upwards to 70 degrees, 71, 72 degrees, and these fish are going to move all out of here. They want that 65 to 68 degree water temperatures, and that's where these secondary sloughs are really going to come into play. So you have areas like this. This is some deep water cutting into shallow water. So you have shells, sand, and a slough, and you're close to the ocean where that cooler water is pushing in, which is an ideal combination for those black drum to feed and hang out in the post-spawn to get all their energy back, to feed heavily, and then once this all gets too warm, they'll head back out into the ocean. Now, there's also some shoals back here. You see this? This is some shallow water here. So you have 20 plus feet of water, right up to 8 feet of water, and here's a shoal. So these areas right here where you have these deep water, shallow water, and shoaling is going to be great structures and secondary structures for those fish to pull up in these areas. And again, they're closer to that ocean and that cooler water pushing in. Now, I'm not blowing up any spots here. These are just areas where I would look year to year to see where those fish are moving to. So early on in the spring in that pre-staging area for the pre-spawn, when the water temperatures are lower, this is really going to be where live presentations of bait is going to be really advantageous, or even cut bait like bunker or clam or live eel, stuff like that is really going to help you catch some really big monster striper. Now, you can use lures, of course, and of course paddle tails and soft plastic presentations to mimic those fish is going to be your best bet. Now, as you get a little bit warmer, I would go a little more faster fishing techniques, things like an SP minnow, things where you could cover a lot of water and search for those areas in that migration highway type of situation. That's when I would use plugs, bombers, SP minnows, moving baits, faster moving baits for both bluefish and striper. And of course, if bluefish are around, you're not going to want to use any soft plastics because it's going to cost you a fortune. Now, talking about black drum, what you could use here, of course, clam is going to be ideal for black drum. I think black drum prefer clam over any other bait, but so does everything else in the spring. So a great way to mitigate fish or bait stealers, I should say, is by using some crab. Bait that is going to stay on your hook for a long period of time so that those little fish stealers aren't stealing all your bait and you're fishing with a bare hook. So there's a couple of quick tips on lures and baits for black drum, bluefish, stripers, your large predatory fish coming in on the spring. Now, if you want to see real life application of this stuff, go ahead and click on this video right here where you can see as we had to pivot throughout the entire day and changing tides and changing tactics in order to catch monster fish, and we caught a load of them and had a ball. And you can too by watching this video right here and adapting those tactics to your own fishing. So thanks for tuning in, Fish Lots. I'll see you out there on the water.